On October 4th, 1907, a steam shovel crew arrived at the Culebra Cut to find the canyon wall had moved. 500,000 cubic yards of clay had detached overnight and was creeping at 14 feet per day. Too soft to load. But that was not the worst news. The worst news was that it had no bottom. The rock strata under the isthmus were folded, fractured, and saturated. Cutting this canyon had set something in motion that a steam shovel could not stop. But the steam shovel was going to dig it out again anyway. That was the job. If you are new to Steel and Sweat, this channel covers the machines and the men of American industrial history, the things that built the country and what those things cost. Subscribe and leave a comment below with the next story you want us to dig into. This is the story of the Bucyrus steam shovels in the Culebra Cut, the largest excavation in the history of the world at the time of its completion, and the men who ran those machines in a canyon that spent 10 years trying to fill itself back in, the machines that moved a continent, the continent that moved back. But here is what the production records of the Isthmian Canal Commission and the celebration of the canal's opening in August 1914 largely omitted. From 1907 through 1914, the Culebra Cut experienced over 100 slides. Some crept, some came without warning. One buried equipment and workers and closed the canal bed overnight. The slides did not distinguish between the $20 a month black Caribbean worker shoveling muck by hand at the canyon floor and the 95-ton Bucyrus steam shovel swinging its 5 cubic yard dipper into the blasted rock face. They took both with equal indifference. The shovels that the official record describes as triumphs of American engineering productivity are also in the photographic record. Steam shovel number 201, sitting amidst upheaved material on February 6, 1913, was swallowed by the pressure pushing up from below the canal bed. Steam shovel number 258, caught in a slide at Culebra on May 29, 1913, stood surrounded by loaded flat cars that were going nowhere. The machines that moved the mountain were also the machines the mountain moved. To understand what the Bucyrus shovel was and what it could do, you have to understand the production problem that the Culebra Cut presented. But to understand what the Bucyrus shovel was up against, you have to understand what was being excavated. The Continental Divide through the Isthmus of Panama rose about 300 feet above sea level at the summit of the cut. The Panama Canal had to pass through it at 40 feet above sea level. That meant excavating a canyon roughly 9 miles long, 300 feet wide at the base, and up to 260 feet deep through rock and clay and the fractured geology of a mountain range in a tropical climate that put 100 inches of rain on the isthmus every year. The French had started it in 1881 under Ferdinand de Lesseps, and they spent 20 years and 20,000 lives before the money ran out and the project collapsed. The United States took over in 1904 and inherited a partially dug canyon, a collection of rusting French equipment, and the same geology the French had encountered, which had not improved during the interval. The Bucyrus 95-ton steam shovel was the primary excavation machine the Americans brought to solve this problem. It had a 5 cubic yard dipper, which translated to approximately 8 tons of material per bite. The shovel was rail-mounted, moving on standard gauge railroad tracks that the ground crew laid ahead of it as it advanced into the cut. It was self-propelled by chain drive, and it could rotate 180 degrees to swing from the rock face on one side to the spoil train on the other. Each bite took under a minute. They crowded the dipper into the blasted rock face, filled the bucket, swung to the flat car, tripped the dipper, swung back, and repeated. A shovel loading a 20-car spoil train could finish the train in under 20 minutes. Then the loaded train pulled out and an empty train moved in, and the sequence continued without pause. Crews, typically numbered 4 or 5 men. The operator controlled the dipper and the swing. 2 firemen kept the coal boiler running at pressure to drive the steam engines that powered every function. A craneman handled the load, and a mechanic kept the machine operational in the heat and mud of the Panamanian Isthmus. Each shovel was a small industrial operation, burning coal, producing steam, consuming crew labor, and producing excavated material at a rate that no human-powered digging system had ever matched. In March of 1910, a single Bucyrus shovel in the Culebra Cut excavated 70,000 cubic yards of material in 26 working days. That was a canal construction record. Each shovel over the full course of the American excavation averaged more than 1 million cubic yards removed. 77 of the 102 shovels working the canal were Bucyrus machines, the rest Marion shovels from Ohio. At peak excavation, all 102 were working simultaneously in the cut, in 3 shifts, around the clock. But the logistics required to keep them producing were as complex as the shovels themselves. Each shovel loaded spoil into trains of 20 flat cars that ran on a parallel track alongside it. When the train was loaded, it pulled out and an empty train moved in. 40,000 rail cars were in service. 160 locomotives pulled them. At the busiest periods in the cut, a loaded train was departing or an empty train arriving every minute of the operating day. The spoil was hauled 12 miles to dump sites where it was used to build the Gatun Dam, the earthen structure that created the Gatun Lake Reservoir at the canal's Atlantic end. 6,000 men worked in the cut on a given day, drilling holes for dynamite, loading charges, operating the shovels, running the trains, laying track, and clearing the rubble from the last blast so the shovels could reach fresh rock. Dynamite consumption in the cut ran to 400,000 pounds per month. The noise was described by visitors as continuous and total. How do you position a 95-ton machine on the floor of a canyon that you are actively destabilizing by excavating its walls? How does the shovel operator read the rock face in front of him for the signs that the wall above is moving, when the same compressed air drill that the blasting crew uses to place the dynamite has fractured the very strata he is watching? Leave a comment below. But the machine that could outproduce any previous excavation technology in history could not outproduce geology in motion. The slides came in 2 forms. Gravity slides occurred when saturated material, rain-soaked clay and loose rock, slid downward over a harder, more impervious layer beneath it, like wet soil over bedrock. The slope above the cut would hold until the weight of the saturated material exceeded the friction coefficient of the surface below. When that threshold was crossed, the slope moved. Deformation slides were different and more dangerous. These occurred when the weight of the canyon walls, relieved of lateral support by the excavation below, compressed the weaker material at depth. The rock and clay at the base deformed under the load, and the canyon floor heaved upward. Steam shovels working the canyon bottom encountered deformation slides not from above but from below as the ground under their tracks pushed up and swallowed them. The first major American slide was the Cucaracha slide of October 1907. 500,000 cubic yards of clay in a glacier slow mass that the shovels could not bite into. The engineers sluiced it out with high-pressure water monitors, pushing the clay slurry into the drain channels. It took weeks. The slide had barely been cleared when the same slope began moving again. The Cucaracha slide at the south end of the cut would recur throughout the entire construction period and would still be moving after the canal opened. In January 1912, when the Cucaracha slide completely blocked the canal bed again, Colonel Gaillard, the Army Corps of Engineers officer in charge of the cut, sent a message to Chief Engineer George Goethals asking what to do. Goethals sent back 3 words: hell, dig it out. If you're finding this history as important as anything we've covered on this channel, go ahead and hit subscribe right now and leave a comment below with the next story you want to see. But the slides were not the only way the cut killed men. The dynamite that blasted the rock face for the shovels to load was transported, handled, and placed by a workforce of over 40,000 men, most of them black Caribbean workers from Jamaica, Barbados, and the other British West Indies colonies, who had been recruited under contracts that paid them at rates roughly 1/3 those of the white American workers doing the same categories of work. The death rate among this workforce was documented in the Isthmian Canal Commission's own records. In the first half of 1906, the death rate among non-white workers ran at 59 per thousand annually, compared to 17 per thousand for white employees. What does it mean to be paid 1/3 the wage of the man doing the same work beside you in a canyon equally indifferent to both? 23 men died and 40 were injured in a single explosion. On December 12, 1908, at Basso Bispo in the Cut, a premature detonation set off 44,000 tons of dynamite that had been loaded into the blast holes for a scheduled shot. Men and steam shovels were thrown across the canyon floor. Nearly 60,000 cubic yards of rock filled the canal bed, in some places 20 to 30 feet deep. The official Isthmian Canal Commission count of American-era deaths was 5,609 workers. Historians who have studied the records believe the actual number was substantially higher, because the record-keeping system counted deaths differently by race, and because workers who left the zone injured and died elsewhere were not counted. The steam shovel crews understood the slide risk in their bodies before they understood it analytically. They learned to read the sounds, the pop of fracturing rock, and the particular silence that preceded a gravity slide when the ambient noise of the cut dropped as the slope above began to move. The accident whistle, a specific pattern sounded by a shovel engineer when a slide was coming, was a signal every worker in the cut knew to run from, because the slides that came without warning were the ones that buried men. From 1907 to 1914, over 100 slides occurred in the Culebra Cut. Some were measured in thousands of cubic yards. The largest individual events moved millions, but the man responsible for managing all of it was Lieutenant Colonel David DeBose Gaillard, a West Point graduate and Army Corps of Engineers officer who joined the Panama Canal project in 1908 and was assigned the Central District of the Canal, which meant the Cut. Men who worked with him said he gave 16 hours a day to the Culebra Cut, in addition to his share of the general administration of the canal zone. He checked expenses on small items. It was calculated that his cost management had saved the government $17 million. He described the slides as tropical glaciers made of mud instead of ice, which was as accurate a description as geotechnical science could produce in 1910 for a phenomenon that was not yet fully understood. When a slide blocked the cut, Gaillard dug it out. When it blocked again, Gaillard dug it out again. In July 1913, with the pioneer cut through the bottom of the canyon almost complete, and the canal's opening less than a year away, Gaillard collapsed of what his superiors described as nervous exhaustion from overwork. He was 54 years old. He had spent 6 years directing 16-hour days at a canyon that kept refilling itself. Men who worked with him said he was never not thinking about the cut. He was sent back to the United States for treatment. On October 10, 1913, while Gaillard lay unconscious in a hospital in Baltimore, unable to recognize his wife or son who sat with him, the Gamboa Dike was blasted to flood the cut and connect the Atlantic and Pacific approaches of the canal for the first time. Gaillard did not know it. On December 5, 1913, he died at Johns Hopkins Hospital of a brain tumor. He was 54 years old, 9 months before the canal formally opened. The cut he had led was renamed the Gaillard Cut in 1915. It bore his name until the canal was handed over to Panama in 2000, and the original name was restored. The man who gave the last 6 years of his life to that canyon died 4 months before he could have stood at its rim and watched the first ship pass through. On May 20th, 1913, before Gaillard's collapse, steam shovels number 222 and number 230 completed the pioneer cut at the bottom of the Culebra excavation. They faced each other on the canal floor. The crew of shovel 222 posed for a photograph. The moment was the nominal completion of the excavation, though slides continued to plague the sea yacht through the canal's opening and for decades after. The canal officially opened to traffic on August 15, 1914, 11 years after the United States had taken over the project, and the first ship through the Culebra Cut passed over the ground that had been dug out, slid back in, dug out again, and finally held. The 95-ton Bucyrus steam shovels that moved the material were themselves replaced by the early decades of the 20th century, as diesel power and crawler tracks made rail-mounted steam shovels obsolete on new excavation projects. Almost all of the Panama Canal shovels were scrapped on the isthmus. A handful survived. One Bucyrus model 50B was shipped to California and eventually preserved at a museum in Nederland, Colorado. It is one of 2 remaining operational examples of its type. The machines that excavated the largest cut in human history are gone, except for the canal they left behind. What is the right accounting for a project whose official death toll was tabulated in separate columns by race? The official death toll for the American construction period was 5,609. The canal they built is 51 miles long. That works out to roughly 110 deaths per mile in the official record. Historians who have examined the full accounting believe the real number was higher, weighted toward the Black and Caribbean workers whose deaths the official counting system tracked less completely. The men who drove the Bucyrus shovels and maintained their boilers and laid the rails ahead of them in the mud are in the photographic record of the construction. So are the men who loaded dynamite by hand in the blast holes and cleared the spoil trains and sluiced the cucaracha clay with water monitors at the base of the slide. They are in the Isthmian Canal Commission's photographs, which are in the National Archives. They are also in the Commission's mortality tables, where they are counted, sorted by race and nationality, and tallied. The canal is still there. The slides are still there, managed now by the Panama Canal Authority with the understanding of rock mechanics that took the construction of the canal itself to develop. Every ship that passes through the Culebra Cut passes through the canyon that the Bucyrus shovels dug, and that the mountain kept filling back in, and that the men dug out again and again until it held. The Culebra Cut built everything that floats through it. If these are the stories that matter to you, subscribe to Steel and Sweat. Leave a comment below with the next story you want us to dig into. Thanks for watching.